Hi everyone, this is Future Kristen. I just wanted to give a little disclaimer before you start this video. I decided not to upload this last week because given the situation, I was not doing well personally. It was a lot of spiraling and I knew what this video was going to be. I knew that it was not going to be positive, and I didn't think that we needed more negativity than what is already going around, and I just didn't want to distract from the conversations that were happening online, on YouTube, and of course just amongst ourselves. But I didn't want to just post this video and pretend nothing was going on, because obviously there's a lot going on right now, and I want you to know that I am feeling it too. I am mourning with a lot of you. So I just want you to know that no matter what happens, this channel will always be a safe space for diverse readers everywhere. I will continue to use my platform to advocate, spread awareness, and I will refuse to be silent on the issues that are impacting readers all over the country and all over the world. I hope that my channel will continue to be a source of happiness and joy and entertainment for you, and truly from the bottom of my heart, I hear you and I am with you. So I just wanted to come on here and say that before I go into this video. So that's the end of my spiel. Please continue with the rest of the video. Thank you. There was a point where I was using red tabs for all the red flags in this book, and I literally ran out. There seems to be this rhetoric on book talk and in general book spaces on the internet where people say that if you don't like a book, then to just don't say anything about it. I'm honestly kind of baffled that there are so many people that will genuinely get mad at you if you post quote unquote negative reviews about books. Some might even say that I'm that kind of reviewer because I post videos about books that I don't like. I've even had people in my comments say you made this whole video for what? Just because you didn't like a book? And I just want to say in defense of myself, all those videos were because the books were genuinely problematic. Blood at the Root was genuinely misogynistic. It ends with us glorified abuse. And unfortunately, we have a new book to add to that collection. And I'm gonna have to censor myself here because this book talks about things such as drug use, SH, and even SIs, and it's marketed to a YA audience. And I'm here to tell you that this book is absolutely not meant for children. Now, I want to give a disclaimer before I go any further into this video. So far, every single book that I picked up, read, and reviewed on this channel, I did so with the best intentions. I already mentioned Blood at the Root, but I picked up that book because I knew it was from a debut author, I knew it was from an author of color, and I liked the premise. I did not even look at Goodreads before I started that book. It was the same with books like Immortal Dark, 4 Eats and a Funeral, even A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I picked up those books because I wanted to read them, not with the intention that I wanted to give them bad reviews. And it was the exact same instance with this book. A Darker Mischief is a YA horror novel. Now, it is not a debut, but I picked it up because it also has a lot of LGBTQ themes. The two main characters are gay and they are in a relationship, and I knew that before I went into the book, before I knew anything else about it. And the reason that I picked it up was because when I was in Portland, I saw that it was on a display in Powell's bookstore. It was specifically in a section on LGBTQ literature, and I was like, oh, that's perfect, that's my MO. Let me pick up this book. And this was a book that when I finished it, I was so conflicted about it that I even read it a second time just to make sure that I knew exactly what I wanted to say going into this video. And I also want to say that the point of this video is not to dog on this author. It's not to criticize them personally. My critiques on this book and the reason that I'm making this video is because it's for a YA audience. And this is a topic that has kind of come up semi-frequently in my other videos when I'm talking about the YA books that I read that are recently published. Because a lot of them are leaning more towards sex and these other topics that are not widely talked about in young adult / younger audience books. And I want to be clear, I'm not against talking about sex in these books. On the contrary, I think that it's very important to have a healthy conversation about these topics to a young audience, especially with topics like consent, how to have safe sex, and things of that nature. But the way that these topics were handled in this book genuinely concerned me. Which brings up my first issue, and my greatest issue with this book is that it doesn't have any trigger warnings. As I mentioned at the start of this video, it already deals in a lot of serious and heavy topics, and I had no idea that that was going to be in the book when I started. And now I'm 23 years old. I'm an adult. So when I encounter these topics in a book, I am able to process that and it doesn't affect me personally. I can engage with this kind of content without putting myself at risk, but that is not the same for other readers, especially younger readers. And since this book did not give any trigger warnings, I will have to give them now at the start of my video. So in my review and analysis of this book, I will be covering topics such as SA, child abuse, drug abuse, STIs, homophobia, death, murder, SH, and general mental health struggles. I also forgot to include topics of violence, hate crimes, and general coercion. Again, none of this is listed at the very beginning of the book. I am an adult reading young adult literature. It is easier for me to get into these intense topics and process them in a way that is healthy and constructive for me. That is absolutely not the same for young adults. And that's not to say that they don't have like the mental fortitude to handle these topics. It's just that they're literal children. Their brains are literally just not as developed as they would be if they were older. Not to mention that there are also just some readers that are more sensitive to these topics than others, whether it's their own traumas or just something that they're not comfortable reading. That is the purpose of a trigger warning, to let you know what a book is gonna be about before you read it. And there's a whole separate rhetoric that I don't even want to go into about people saying that like, oh, trigger warnings will spoil the book. My philosophy is, if you can, make the world more accessible for someone, why wouldn't you? Why would you want to purposefully trigger someone just to like get your plot twist? It's quite frankly extremely reckless and harmful to not include trigger warnings, especially when you know exactly what you're going to be talking about in a book, especially to the degree that this book covers these topics. I'm telling you, when I picked up this book and I saw that it's published under Scholastic, my jaw was on the floor. I'm getting really heated already, and I'm not even talking about the book, but this is just something that I'm very passionate about. As a content creator that consumes young adult literature, I think this is something that we should be talking about and something that we should be calling out writers, publishers, whoever, to make sure that this is something that they know that they should be including. To make sure that they know that this is not okay. They should be including trigger warnings, but regardless, I need to get into the rest of the video. So, A Darker Mischief is a YA horror novel. We follow the story of Cal. He's right here on the front cover. He is now attending a boarding school because he was kicked out of his hometown for an incident that we don't know what actually happened, but now he's at this boarding school. He's having a really hard time fitting in, and he eventually finds these hidden messages from a secret society. He decides that he wants to join the society, so he goes through the rush ceremony and does anything and everything in his power to get accepted in this society. Along the way, he meets Luke, that is his love interest, and together they are uncovering the mysteries of their school and the society itself. There's a lot of mystery, puzzles, and Cal essentially has to figure out how deep do the roots of corruption go in this society. So that is the spoiler-free summary of this book. If you don't want to find out what happens, please click off the video now. And again, if you are sensitive to any of the topics that I previously mentioned, please protect yourself and do not continue with this video. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the review. So I first want to go into society as a whole. So they are technically called the Society of the Seven Eyes. So essentially, their whole motivation, what they're dedicated to doing, is uncovering the history of the school. And I will go a little bit into like my personal critique that's like not really based on anything logical or empirical. So most of the plot points, most of the interactions that we as the reader have with society is with society members essentially breaking into old abandoned buildings on the school campus, looking around and writing a report on the history of the building. And I like history as much as the next person, but it's a little nerdy. It's a little anticlimactic for what preconceived notion I have for what a secret society is. It just feels so unserious in comparison to the things that they do as society. Like, these are people that are wearing like carnival masks. They meet in the dead of night. They wear hooded robes, and to be fully inducted into society, they have to brand you And then once you go through all these trials and tribulations to get into society, you spend the rest of your high school career writing history reports. It doesn't align for me personally. Now that's just a personal critique, but I do have like more like actual critiques. Some of the riddles / puzzles were solved really easily. Like Cal as a character just didn't have a lot of like obstacles or struggles, at least in terms of getting into society. Like it seemed pretty easy for him. So the way that he finds out about society is that he's going through the campus one day and he sees spray painted on a building an eye, and he's like, I've seen that before. And then he finds 7 different buildings all with this eye spray painted on them, and one of them has a very helpful link also spray painted above the eye. He boots up his computer, he goes to the website, and it's essentially a puzzle. So when he enters the website, it's essentially like a fill in the blank kind of riddle, and all the riddles are essentially like a play on words about something about the eye. Oh my god, actually, now that I'm like trying to explain this, I'm realizing how like absolutely crazy it is. He has this crazy train of thought where he's like, oh, well, I found this clue on the astronomy building. The stars, space, time is relative, everything is relative. Next to the building was a tree. There's also leaves on the tree, leaves. You can't spell leaves without E. What else can't you spell without E? I. The tree also had apples, and the apples were by the astronomy building. So that means that the answer must be apple of my eye. I wish I was kidding. That's almost exactly his train of thought to get to the answer. And what's even worse is that he was right. So what follows is 7 different puzzles all surrounding this eye motif. And the way he figures out the answers are so just like dumb luck. Like it never feels like he's actually making a logical assumption or he's basing any of his guesses in like an actual thought process. So Cal is essentially given this win. Like it never feels like he actually earns it. The next issue I have with his little induction ceremony is also one that I saw on Goodreads. A lot of people were mentioning this specific scene. Essentially, Cal has to meet the other society members. They blindfold him, put on some noise canceling headphones or something, and then they put him on a boat and ship him off to this island. And then they take off the blindfold and they're like, you have to escape the island now. So the span of this arc, we'll call it, is 2 pages. This is him being on the island. So Cal is freaking out. He's like, I'm gonna freeze out here and die. He does a cute little loop-de-loop on the island and immediately finds this weird necklace. And then within seconds, the boat comes back to the island. The SMs are like, did you find the necklace? And he's like, yeah. And then they just take him back home. And he's even like, what happened? I didn't escape the island like you asked me to. And then they laugh at him like, you stupid little country boy. You were never supposed to escape the island. And now I struggle with this. I struggle in my understanding of this. 1, that necklace never comes back into play. There's no significance to the necklace that he found. 2, there's just like no real buildup of the tension. Because this little plot point is so short, I never once felt like Cal was actually going to have to escape the island by himself. And there is just like so many instances where Cal has to do something to get inducted into society, and he either doesn't struggle, faces no real obstacles, solves the puzzle with ease. Like, I feel like the book is really trying to convince me that Cal is like this super genius, or he's just like super cunning. And I'm like, you're not really convincing me as well as you think you are. For me as the reader to think that a character is incredibly smart or extremely resourceful or really good at solving puzzles, God forbid they should struggle a little bit. God forbid they should be a little bit hard to complete. I know I'm being a little sarcastic, a little flippant here. It's just that the fact that like the plot inconsistencies and the general story building is the least problematic part of this book, it kind of makes me go a little insane. I'm sorry. So the Society of the Seven Eyes, SSE for short, is overseen by Archie. That is the previous alums that went to Essex, that is the name of the school, and were also a part of society. So their whole thing is that they use high school students to make sure that certain legislature does not get passed. This actually makes me really mad because in the book, it starts like the first chapter is a banger. One of the students attending Essex is the daughter of the Vice President of the United States. In this fictional United States, not actually. So she goes to this school and society kidnaps her because her dad is trying to pass some kind of law to make sure that people are paying taxes. So the secret corruption that Cal uncovers, that the whole reason they picked him to rush for society and the whole reason that they've been using people to break into these old abandoned buildings is so that they could have a place to first kidnap Gretchen and then stow her away to make sure no one found her. So I have a few problems with this like general plot line. First, it's because they imply early on in the book that Gretchen made her dad fight for this law. So they're implying that essentially the vice president is a puppet to his 16-year-old daughter. It also implies that this society of billionaires needs high school children, people that are barely going through puberty, to carry out a literal kidnapping for the future of their capitalist endeavors, which they already prefaced to us in the book that Archie is all powerful, that they can do anything. They can make police charges go away, that they can make cancer go away. That's a whole other thing. It's not literally what they imply, but it's kind of what they imply, that they can cure cancer. But for some reason, they need high school kids to carry out kidnapping. As if, I don't know, they couldn't bribe a politician. Are we above that now? There's also a separate plot point where society always elects a lamb that's essentially the fall guy. So if whatever devious plan they're carrying out that year fails, they can just push it on this person and they will take the fall for everything. Now, the implication is that society is homophobic because the lamb is always someone that is petite, dainty, queer. And I was okay with that for the greater commentary about homophobia. But the author doesn't double down on this at all. Because the CEO of society, the president, if you will, his name is Pinky. Now, they don't come out and actually label him as gay or any kind of queer identity, but they do say that he's in love with Luke and he has had relations with another man. So my perspective is if Pinky can be in power, then how quote unquote homophobic is society actually? And then they really don't give a good consistent background of society acting this way. Cal comes to this conclusion because he finds diary entries from this boy that was expelled from Essex because he was the lamb and he was also gay. And in this book, Cal only finds 3 instances where there were missing children reported and someone got expelled for some kind of incident at the school, which is weird, but it's not as sinister as they're trying to make it seem. And then in the present, they don't even end up picking a lamb anyway. There's so many things I have a hard time understanding when it comes to society acting as an antagonist in the story. And I think part of it is that there's a lot of telling in the book and not showing. They tell us consistently that Archie is all powerful. They essentially run the country and we don't know about it. They have ties in the FBI, but they don't really show us how truly powerful Archie is. There's a point in the book where Cal fails one of his science quizzes and he's like, Archie made me fail AP physics. And that's a genuine concern he has. For what reason? I couldn't tell you. I'm telling you, this whole book is them trying to convince me that society is secretly sinister and evil. And I'm you cannot convince me that history nerds are evil. It just makes me laugh a little bit because the implication is that half of society is conspiracy, corruption, meddling in politics. and the other half is, relatively normal high school students that are just really into history. So overall, what I'll say about Society is that it lacks a lot of stakes, a lot of tension. I think it would have really benefited from more displays of power. I'm gonna go into the characters now because, oh my god, there is not a single likable person in this entire cast. And I don't think it's necessarily bad, but in this instance, what makes them unlikable is not like, oh, they're crazy. It's like they're committing actual crimes. Let's start with our main character, Cal. His full name is Calixte. I've never heard that name before in my life. It sounds cool. I'm gonna start by saying that Cal is an actually awful person. Because make no mistake, when we start the book, Cal is bitter, just like very negative, pessimistic as a character. And then somewhere halfway throughout the book, he suddenly takes the moral high road. And by the end of the book, he's like, I'm a good person and that's what makes me different than the rest of you. And it's just funny because when I started the book, nothing about him convinced me he was a good person. First of all, he's very insecure about himself, so he's just like generally kind of antisocial. He doesn't have a lot of friends, and yet simultaneously thinks he's better than everyone around him. So he is rushing for Society alongside his roommate and friend. While his friend is still like trying to get into Society, he's constantly like, ugh, you got picked and I didn't. Like anytime his roommate is making like better advances for Society, he just like cannot wrap his mind around it. He's like, why would they pick you over me? I'm so obviously better than you. And there's even a point where his love interest, Luke, they're going on some kind of explo is what they call them when they break into buildings and write a cute little history report about it. There's a point where he's like, Luke is definitely gonna get into Society. Like, he is exactly what they want, and I'm not, and I don't know. He says, I have to remind myself, Luke had certain opportunities that I didn't. And I just think that that's funny a little bit because Luke is supposed to be Korean and Cal is white. And obviously in this book, race does not play into the characters, the plot, or anything, but I'm just like, the cognitive dissonance to say that he is at an advantage that Cal is not. Oh my god. It's just extremely funny to me because he spends most of the book, at least like the beginning chunk of the book, bringing other people down so that he can make himself seem like the better person, that he is somehow superior to the people around him. And then I will go into this later, but one of his big opportunities, one of his big explos is that he breaks into the vice president's daughter's bedroom and takes a picture of her to prove to Society that he is willing to be bold. So he's talking to his ghost friend. Yes, he has a ghost friend. I will get into it later. And he says, it's a good idea. Clever, unconventional, imaginative, and so far, it's working. His ghost friend, which is actually his abuser, responds, is it worth the moral compromise? And Cal, our protagonist, the person we're supposed to root for, says, only if I think there is one. And honestly, man, sometimes I'm just like, f*** them all. So yeah, our protagonist, the person we're supposed to root for, thinks that there is no moral compromise in breaking into a girl's room while she's sleeping to take pictures of her. So they really like make him bottom of the barrel kind of bad person. And then halfway through the book, he is suddenly like, oh, I feel so bad. I'm sorry, Gretchen. Let's be friends now. Poor girl does not even know about what he did. And he's like, well, I want to make myself feel better. So let's be friends so I can absolve myself of any and all guilt that I feel about invading your privacy. Cal is the epitome of self-loathing and simultaneous narcissism. It's actually kind of crazy. I'm very conflicted about his character because he does go through some very real and very intense traumas that could explain his behavior, but I fear that instead of giving this character genuine complexity, we just made a character that is constantly flipping back and forth between I'm a good person and I actually don't care if this hurts you. I do what I want. We missed the opportunity to really go into the complexities that is how trauma affects us and how people that are experiencing mental health struggles can be good people and still do bad things, that those instances don't define them, but the damage that they cause is still true and valid. There is a very interesting conversation that could have been had, but instead what took place is a character that is constantly flipping back and forth between these extremes, and there's no real complexity or depth that is given to any of these emotions. And overall, I don't like Cal. And I feel bad that I don't, but I don't like him. Now, I already talked a little bit about Luke, so I'm gonna go into his character now. If you think that Cal is constantly flipping back and forth, Luke is even worse. He has this whole weird separate plot that I honestly think they could have just scrapped entirely. Luke has this one character trait that is so central to his character for some reason, and it's that he is a chimera. Not like a literal chimera. Don't think the chimera ants are. Luke was supposed to be a twin, and in the womb, he ate his twin, but somehow absorbed both of their DNA. So he has a very rare condition in which he doesn't actually have DNA, and he really carries this with him to the point where he does spray paint, street art, whatever, and his tag is a baby in a womb with a chunk of its neck bitten out. And there is so much of the book that is really dedicated to making sure that you as the reader know this about Luke. Quite frankly, I think we dedicate a lot of time to it because the only reason that this is central to his character is so that later on in the book, when they kidnap Gretchen, the vice president's daughter, they use Luke to mask her DNA because he doesn't actually have any. I think it was just a tad overdone for his character. So Luke's whole character is that he is a troubled kid. He comes from a rich family. His mother died. She resented him for absorbing his twin. His father is incredibly physically abusive to him. And at one point, Luke ran away from home and was living on the streets. He then took a pen, kind of, are we familiar with the movie Psycho? Yeah, he did that and was on his way to juvie. Society, Pinky, found Luke and they were like, we will get you out of juvie if you do our bidding. And that is how he got mixed up in Essex and society, which my question is, how did they find him? What real connection? Did they just pick him up off the street? Did they Google search children that probably have undiagnosed mental health issues that are going to juvie and might need the help of nefarious societies? And his picture popped up on the Google homepage? What happened? They give us no real explanation for how Luke got mixed up in society. I failed to see how they picked him out of the crowd. I'm trying to keep this as compressed as possible because any critique I have about one topic always leads into a critique about another. It's just one big tangled web of mess when I'm talking about this book. I don't have a lot else to say about his character. He's very unlikable and it's done on purpose and I can recognize that. I think it's a tad too unlikable to the point where I'm Luke definitely never even really loved Cal. So his crying at the end of the book being I'm sorry I had to, but I'm my bad Pookie. It's not convincing me. I also saw some people saying that they didn't like the insta love that was going on between Cal and Luke. And honestly, I am not opposed to it because in the book, I think that the insta love is actually love bombing. We're seeing Luke being intentionally manipulative, preying on Cal and his great desire to have friends and be loved, and using that to essentially manipulate Cal because as we find out, Luke was actually already a part of society and he is called the wolf. He was supposed to be the person that sniffed out the lamb, aka the fall guy, and he had originally chosen Cal. Then we have Pinky, who is the president of society, and he's honestly just this mustache twirling villain that has no real backstory or motivation for being as evil as he is. I think a lot of the issues I have with the book could be summarized by an overall that the story needs to answer more questions to explain plausibility. Why does Archie need the students to carry out their plans if they are supposedly all-powerful? Why do government officials keep sending their children to this school when they are notoriously kidnapped? Why do they specifically need Cal to to break into these buildings if they have been breaking into buildings for how many years now? Why is Cal so special to their plans? Because if you're telling me that he is supposed to be extraordinarily clever or smart, you're lying, he's not. There's so many questions I need answered. So that portion of the video was all the parts that I just think we were lacking in character development, story, plot, world building, all very technical issues and technical critiques I have about the book. Now we get into a little bit of what I deem as problematic plot points, aka the scenes and instances that I really did not like reading in this book. At some point in the story, our main character Cal goes to a party, and this party is absolutely the bane of my existence. The first incident is that he walks in on Luke and Pinky, and Luke is performing oral sex on Pinky. So Cal stumbles upon them, and the first thing that he recalls in that moment is that Pinky told Cal when they were talking about Luke owed him everything for getting him out of juvie, for getting him away from his home life, that he was owed everything. He notes that Luke does not look present in the moment. He has a blank halogen stare. So for all intensive purposes, Cal has every reason to believe that Luke is not in a position where he can consent to what is happening, that Pinky is in a position of power, that he is abusing that position to get Luke to perform this act on him. And now I don't want to say that Cal should have swooped in, saved the day, knocked Pinky out or whatever, but despite knowing all these things, Cal leaves Luke and Pinky alone. And he gives him the silent treatment after this happened because he thinks that Luke cheated on him. I think that this is incredibly harmful to put in a book because very obviously we see that this character is acknowledging all the ways in which Luke is being coerced, that he is not in a position where he can consent. And yet he is still punishing this character for these actions. It gives me such a sick taste in my mouth to read it. And I read this twice, and both instances it just gutted me that they put this in the book. So Cal feels rage and heartbreak, his words, after seeing Luke in this position. Then Cal leaves Luke and Pinky alone, and he goes into the next room and participates in a group activity. Then he goes home for Christmas break, and he has a fever. He's starting to feel these weird symptoms. He has sores in his mouth, and when he goes to his pediatrician, he is diagnosed with an STI. My first issue with this is that when Cal is talking to the doctor, he tells him that, oh, this is just, a disease that gets transmitted through kissing, which I think is very problematic to put in the book, because if you're going to talk about STIs and things of that nature, fine, but do so in a way that is actually informative. God forbid a healthy, constructive conversation about the genuine risks that go along with having unprotected relations. But no, this doctor is saying, oh yeah, this is just transmitted through kissing, when we absolutely know that it is not only transmitted through kissing. There was a point where I was using red tabs for all the red flags in this book, and I literally ran out. There is no conversation about the other many possible ways that this kind of disease can be transmitted. And even worse, Cal as a character has no time to really reflect on the severity of this disease. We are given no insight, no internal dialogue to the fact that Cal now has a disease for the rest of his life. This disease is incurable, and he has it at the ripe age of 16. And to make it even worse, because it gets worse, when Cal goes back to school after he decides, hey, maybe it's time to not give this silent treatment to someone that was assaulted, he meets up with Luke, and Luke is like, why won't you let me kiss you? And Cal tells him, oh yeah, I have herpes. And Luke says, I don't care, and kisses him anyway. It's portrayed as romantic that Luke, despite at the risk of contracting a disease he would have for the rest of his life, decided that he could not bear to live without kissing the love of his life. It's not romantic. It's not humorous. It's incredibly harmful. Again, to put this in a book that is meant for young readers, I think it's incredibly reckless, And I can't imagine how many people had to have read this and thought it was okay to put in a book for readers as young as 13. I hope that readers, people that picked up this book, understand the genuine severity of all these actions by these characters. That contracting an STD, especially one that will never ever go away, is so much more serious than how they're portraying it in this book. That knowingly putting someone else at risk of contracting the same disease is so reckless and, quite frankly, evil. There is just so much that I could say about just these two plot points, and honestly, just for that, I should have put down the book. Now, I didn't, and I read it twice so that I could come on here and tell people that this book is absolutely not for a young adult audience. Again, we can talk about these topics in a way that is constructive, in a way that is healthy, but this absolutely is not in any way healthy or constructive. It's borderline flippant about these very real and very serious topics. And then at the end of the book, there is a scene where Cal has some kind of mental break, and we find him in a garden with a shard of glass, and he is using it on himself. I really hate this scene because it's just like, in my opinion, I don't know how other people felt about it, but I really genuinely felt that this scene was only used to convey to the reader that he is having some kind of mental break. There is no real care that is given to this scene, especially given the severity of what he's doing. There is no greater discussion about his mental health, and it just like, it gets swept away as like, oh yeah, I saw a therapist and whatever, I'm taking medication now. You cannot put a character in that kind of scenario and just wash it away with, yep, I'm getting therapy now. First, I just want to say that I was among the group of people that watched the unedited version of 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. That one show, that one scene completely changed my perspective about how we show self and these mental health struggles in books that are meant for young adults. And it is my opinion that there's really no reason why we should have scenes that are this level of graphic for young readers. It's just not necessary. It doesn't give the kind of care and attention that you think you're giving to this kind of topic. It is only for shock. It is only for the, honestly, trauma of it all. It's gross, it's disgusting, and it's especially disgusting that you would put this in a book without a trigger warning. It's so unnecessary, and I genuinely got so mad reading it. Like, if you're gonna insist that this is pivotal to the plot of the book, you need a trigger warning. Absolutely, you need a trigger warning. That's not even going into the other multiple instances in which Pinky, Luke, all put their hands on Cal without his consent, whether that is touching him inappropriately, grabbing him in public, trying to coerce him into having relations. And honestly, I would even argue that having all these different instances where Cal is preyed upon just perpetuates the stereotype about gay men and how they are hypersexual predators. And I understand that the author of this book is a gay man himself, but I don't think that absolves him of perpetuating these harmful stereotypes. And I would love to live in a world where we can write characters where we can have gay men that are sexual without people like immediately saying like, oh, and see, this is why gay people are so hypersexual. Look at them. They're just like falling into this stereotype. I would love to live in a world where we can have characters that exist on both ends of the spectrum and not immediately portray it as a negative. Obviously, people can be hypersexual and it doesn't have to be a negative thing, but we are perpetuating the worst part of this stereotype in which people believe that gay men are predators because the way that these characters act are predatory. Like, there's even a point where Pinky's like, how far are you willing to go to get up in society? And he is touching him without consent. There are so many instances throughout this book where I just had to remind myself that I'm reading a book that is meant for a young adult audience. If this was an adult book, I would still have so many issues with it, but I cannot even wrap my mind around that this is meant for such a young audience. Again, I have no issue talking about these very intense topics in young adult literature, but they need to be done with care. There needs to be an actual conversation about the severity of these issues. It needs to be done in the book and outside the book. I've seen so many other titles that talk about these kinds of topics, and they provide resources. It ends with us provided resources for women experiencing domestic violence, and this book has no resources to help children that maybe are conflicted about their own sexuality, that are experiencing abuse in their household, or that are sexually active and maybe nervous about asking for protection or how to educate themselves about STDs. All these topics are talked about with such a gross recklessness that I really question all the people that read this book before it was published. I really think what could have made this book so much better is, God forbid, some actual introspection on the characters. Cal never has any greater commentary about the fact that he has a disease for the rest of his life. That one decision, one instance, completely altered the rest of his life, that he potentially gave that same disease to someone else. I'm so tired of this reckless I have to laugh because I'm just how do you mess up this badly? All the people that these books go through before they hit the shelves, how did we miss so badly? I would genuinely call for Scholastic or whoever has the power to do this to, in any future reprints of this book, there needs to be a trigger warning. There needs to be some kind of hey, heads up, if you are sensitive to any of these topics, just so you know, they're in this book and you may not want to read it. I think we are at a time in the publishing world where that is not outside the norm. That is not outside the realm of possibility. And I feel so passionately about this because, again, it's for people as young as 13. And that is not to say that they aren't able to handle these kinds of topics. It's just for their safety. And I would say that for young adult books and adult books. I think in general, for everyone's safety, to make the world more accessible, we should have trigger warnings. We should have constructive conversations about these really intense topics. And I really worry about the messages, the indirect messages that come across to audiences when they pick up this book, especially younger audiences. And honestly, this is why it's really important that us as adults know what our children are reading. Because you could pick up this book and, the cover gives you the idea that it's a horror. You could read the summary and still have no idea about the real intense topics that are in it. I didn't even talk about the actual drug abuse that takes place in this book and how casually these characters take unidentified substances as a kind of pain management. Finishing this book and finishing it twice, I can tell you that I felt icky after finishing this book. I felt icky knowing everything that is in it and knowing that someone else could pick it up without knowing just exactly how awful it is. And I don't want to be overtly negative. I don't want to be super mean about it, but I just think this was genuinely handled so recklessly. And I would even implore the publisher or anyone involved in this book to acknowledge the topics that are in it, acknowledge the genuine harm that could come with marketing this book to a younger audience without warning them what is actually in it. So, overall, I think I would give this book a 0 out of 5. There's a lot of plot issues I had with the book, world building, story, but mostly it's just with the subject matter, the way it was handled, the way it was discussed, and the fact that it's for a younger audience. I don't want to pin it on one person, but this is genuine, gross negligence to have these topics and not give it the actual care it deserves. I'm really upset. I'm disappointed that this book is being marketed as just a spooky secret society when it's actually a lot more intense and a lot more gory, to say the least. But please let me know what you think in the comments. If you've read the book, if you agree, if you disagree. I feel really disappointed, genuinely, I feel very upset that this book is out there without any proper care or trigger warnings. It makes me really upset. But whatever. That's why I make this review, and that's why I have to come onto the internet and tell people, because someone decided that they didn't need to. So anyway, that's the end of the video. I can't bring so much negativity into the world, but unfortunately, I had to set the record straight with this book. I feel so empty, and I'm I'm genuinely upset. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this book. I hate looking at it. That's how genuinely angry I am. I don't want to target the author specifically because I think there's so many opportunities. There were so many instances in which during the publishing process, someone could have said, hey, maybe we should like tone it back a little bit. Maybe we should, at the very least, include some additional resources. Someone should have spoken up when it came to publishing this book, especially given the audience. Someone should have, and no one did. So it's not the blame on any one person, and I don't think this reflects on any one person individually. I think this is just a failure of the publishing process, and I think this was a failure of responsibility on so many different people. But anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. I don't know any of these people. If you like this book, it's truly your own opinion, just like this is my own opinion. Truly, the reason I'm making this video is because I think this book is genuinely harmful, and that people should know what is in the book before they read it. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I need to go watch Dancing Fruit or something because I am feeling the gray cloud that is forming around me. I finished this book 2 weeks ago and I thought it was okay before I went into this video, and I'm obviously not. I feel very strongly about this. I feel very passionately about this, but it's over. So thank you for watching. I'm done.